the difference between mental isolation and physical isolation is that with physical isolation, there is a cutoff from like people, so it's almost like an exclusion, like you're not included or allowed to be a part of, or have access to something. Whereas mental isolation is almost your thoughts cutting you out from things, cutting you out from allowing you to enjoy everyday things, the things that you enjoy to do, so your hobbies, your interests. And it's like your mind literally cutting you off, not allowing you to move forward and live life.
If you take physical isolation being something where you are alone and you're cut off and you're separated, it's much the same when it comes to mental isolation, where there's just this blockage and there's this separation that doesn't allow us to move forward, and it's almost like a prison.
The big difference is physically there's just no one there.
Yeah.
Mentally, you could have a lot of people around you and still feel very alone.
Yeah, and I think that's a wild thing, like you could not necessarily be physically isolated, but you still have that mental isolation going on. And oftentimes, you can't judge it by the fact that they're in the room and they're in a room full of people, or even if they have extroverted tendencies, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're in the clear. But I think often when you're working with youth, you could fall into that trap of thinking, oh, like, they seem cool, they seem fine, and they're surrounded by people. But obviously that doesn't negate the fact that there could be some serious isolation and things happening mentally.
As being a, extrovert, a super extrovert, what my mental isolation does is it actually like brings about like shame, where I start to exclude myself because like I'm ashamed of, there's just like shame and I'm ashamed. And so I tend to be like, I'm not worthy to be in this space. Or even if I'm around a whole bunch of people, there's still a shame because it's like, man, I should be happy right now and I'm sad. Like I'm just really, I'm struggling, I'm sad, I'm depressed, even though I'm amongst so many people in such a nice space, in a happy space, a fun space. But there's that shame that's like, you should be happy, you should be feeling this. And so then I feel unworthy to be in this space. So then there's a cutoff for a long period of time where, Whitney's gone MIA, where is she? But I'm like, feel in my mind, like I'm unworthy to be in spaces because I should be operating this way, but I'm not.
Yeah, and I can vouch for you, like in the times that I, because I was one of the people that kind of led your youth ministry at the time you were in it. Everyone adored you and loved you. Everyone saw that you were very talented and wanted to be around you. So when you approached me with these thoughts, I was actually very surprised that it came from you. I was like, well, I could see that kid or that kid, but Whitney? And that's the same with George, which dear George is named after. He had a smile on his face. He was talented and everyone loved him. And yet he was the most mentally isolated kid that we had, and we didn't realize it. I think it's very, very hard to recognize mental isolation because like Josh was saying, it could be an extrovert that seems totally fine and he's not.
Often, like at youth, when we ask for a response, that's when you kind of get these eye-opening moments where the kid that seems the most confident, seems like he's got the world ahead of him because he does, responds and says, actually, I don't believe that I have a future. And so it's wild because there's this disconnect between what you see on the outside and what's happening on the inside. And it's almost like there's this whole world and there's that perpetuation of comparison and insecurity and the rat race and different measures of success that I feel like people can start to really, really believe lies, that aren't true at all, but affect how they interact socially. And Whitney, is exactly as you were saying, you had shame happening on the inside, but people wouldn't see that. It's this internal battle that you're wrestling with that eventually begins to affect how you behave and how you act.
You can't see it. So it literally, when we talked about this concept of speak up, And this is the reason that's our first point, is because one of the big things that's happening within the world of suicide is that people are doing this, are taking their lives without telling anybody.
Yeah.
No one saw it coming. No one had any idea. And so they had this whole huge internal battle that no one was aware of. And so our first point is like, the first step in all of this is to speak up and just tell somebody.
I had a very fortunate scenario with my first suicide attempt, where I had a friend who I was on the phone with, and we were having a conversation, laughing, giggling, and then all of a sudden she said the conversation just kind of turned dark. And so she kind of just heard us changing and different. And then I decided to share, I guess, out of comfort, out of this being a friend that really mattered to me. I shared like, hey, I want you to know, this happened earlier, right before we got on the phone. And her being just a solid friend and a person who's led by the Spirit of God, not only, heard me, but then she said next was, you need to tell someone. Mm-hmm. So I was upstairs in my house, at my parents' house. And again, that whole idea of like, I just had a suicide attempt in the same house as my parents, as siblings. I'm the oldest.
A lot of siblings.
Yeah, I'm the oldest of six. So there are multiple people around, and yet they had no idea that I'd taken a whole bottle of pills for sick.
Wow.
So that next step of her just being like, hey, you need to tell someone. And she went as far as to show up to my house very discreetly. And while my family came, I came to the door and welcomed her in. She came and was watching TV, then just kind of pulled me to the side, like, hey, I'm here to support you, but I'm also not leaving until you tell one of your parents.
Yes, and that is a good friend. Some people and some friends, and Josh, you may have seen this, they are scared to speak out to their friends for fear that the friend will get mad or will make fun of them and say, oh, you're extra, or whatever. But actually, your friend standing up and fighting for you that day was exactly what you needed.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's often one of those things in life where the people that are the closest to us, sometimes it's hard to let them into those areas, but it's absolutely so vital because, friends activated, friends who know can make all the difference in the world, and I think there's such a key in exposing it. And that's why I think, I love this conversation because it just goes to show it's so important to go beyond what's shallow, it's one thing to go online, it's one thing to go virtual, it's one thing to get along with someone and be in a room and be like, yeah, I love that guy's awesome. It's another thing to actually go deeper in relationship, because I do think when we go deeper in relationship, like Whitney was saying, someone noticed a tone, someone noticed, because our language eventually will locate us, if it's shallow, if it's surface level, you might not be able to get a read on what's really going on. But if you actually build a genuine relationship, that's when language starts to give you the location and the pulse of oh, Whitney, there's actually something going on there. I noticed that tone, I noticed the way that you shifted in that conversation. What's going on? Is there something going on? And so I think all of it comes down to the importance of the depth of relationship, right? And that's where I think friends and family are key, because they're on your side, and in those moments they have that depth of relationship to really help.
Friends speaking out, because you may not have had the power to speak up, but as friends speaking up on your behalf could have been the very thing that saved your life.
Yeah.
So we definitely want to empower friends and people. Speak up, because they may not have the strength to do it themselves.
I think there's a lot of different, I know we're going to talk more about triggers, but a lot of different things that cause us to withdraw, that cause us to isolate, whether that's abuse, whether that's bullying. There's power in words. So people speaking things about us, saying things to us that can actually make us retreat. And of course, it's the words that cause these deeper roots, which are things like insecurity and comparison. And like we mentioned earlier, sometimes social media can perpetuate something like that, where you start to go down this track of comparing yourself to all these other people. And it comes down to this feeling of like, I'm unworthy, I'm unlovable, I'm not good enough. And that rejection causes us to distance and to withdraw. And so that's just to name a few things that actually make us withdraw. And
I kept thinking about perfectionism. That linked to comparison. I actually have opposite perfectionism. Instead of always pretending I have it together and looking the part, I'm opposite, where I don't put any effort into trying to do anything. Because if it can't be this way, then what's the use anyway? And what good is others like good in mine? And so in the mental isolation, you start to get to a place where it's like, well, what good is it to, speak up anyways? Because if I speak up, I don't have this scenario as Whitney shared, where I have a friend, I have this thing, but it's like, no, speak up on behalf of someone anyways, even if you don't have that perfect scenario.
Yeah, absolutely. I know for me, I really struggled with the not feeling wanted. That was a biggie for me. So I was like, well, they don't want me there. They don't really want to talk to me. They're just doing it because that's their job to do it, and that's their role as a leader, but they don't really care and really want to know what's in my world and want to spend the time. And, that was a thing I struggled with growing up quite a bit, just obviously with different things that had happened and within my world. And so I think for me, because I definitely was a person that isolated, like going through high school and stuff, I just kind of was like, walls are up. I'm going to protect myself. I'm going to distance myself. I'm going to do this on my own, which I think a lot of us get to that point. A lot of capitalist mentality is within that. Okay, no, you can't. You got to fight through this. If you want to get there, you got to do this.
Yeah, and Jessie, it's crazy how that can cause such a spiral, because the very thing that you actually need the most and want the most is the thing that you push away because you've believed that they don't actually want to have a relationship with you, right? So like on your end, you act really cold and really distant. And it's like this self-protecting, really tough self-protecting mechanism where you're driving away the thing that you really need, again, because of something that you've believed along the way.
I think that, okay, now you have all this time to sit and think about those things, I think is what because like from our house, it's been so nuts. We're isolated. We're a family of 4, so we are getting interactions. I'm the most isolated now because I'm quarantined from everybody. But I find in those moments how much the brain goes and you can't just stay busy to forget everything going on. Mm-hmm. So like by being home so much, you can only watch so much Netflix. You can only look on social media so long before it's like, okay, I've had enough. I need something different from this. And then that's when from what I've heard and talked to people, that seems to be the moment they're actually having to face some of the stuff that the busyness allowed them to hide from. Yeah. If that makes any sense.
Being alone with your thoughts can be a good thing if they're good thoughts and if they're the right thoughts and you're not believing lies and things like that. But certainly there's this, what it's done is it has made people having to have to face things and have to break through things or sit in things that they wouldn't normally. And so I think that's a big cause of isolation, a big cause of mental isolation, and you can see why there could be a spiral, and you can see why crisis lines and things like that are like, okay, we need to be on the forefront of saying we're here for you and we're with you, so that you're not alone in all of that. So yeah, I mean, I think there's quite a few different effects of the coronavirus. I think just pondering some students, like often school can be a bit of a lifeline for some students, and often certain teachers and certain educators and different people in different spheres where they're able to, people who they're able to turn to on a regular basis that might not be their friends or their cliques. Suddenly there's a separation there, if that makes sense at all. But also I think just Whitney was talking about the perpetuation of fear and anxiety. I think those things are heightened. I think the sudden switch in schedules, and especially for people who are creatures of habit, or people who love to embrace change. I mean, don't love change, are being forced to embrace change, and that can cause extra anxiety and fear. So I think those are big things. One of the biggest things I think about is just exposing thoughts, because I think fear and anxiety and these sorts of things can be a prison, right? They can imprison us, or we have the power to imprison them, so to speak, like by arresting certain thoughts that lead us down certain pathways, recognizing the thing, I think fear of the future is a big one, but recognizing, okay, like I actually don't have control of what's going to happen next, so I'm going to arrest that thought. And I think when it comes to community, we can kind of really, really help each other in all of this. And I feel like it's a truth that has stood well before this coronavirus time, that we need to go deeper in relationships. And that's so important, like just because you're online doesn't mean that you've found community, right? And that's why I love all the apps, and I love all the things that point to direct messaging and direct communication. It's why I love Zoom, what we're on right now. There's no real filters, there's nothing like that. We're having a conversation that's virtually almost like it's face to face. I mean, I feel like I'm in the same room with you guys talking to you. And I think that is the absolute key and one of the most effective things online, versus just scrolling, versus just commenting, versus just consuming information that's not actually the relationship and the community that we need. And so I think, I know, Jessie, we've talked a bit about this, but just not just looking for ways to entertain young people in this time and in this season, but actually looking for ways that we can get almost face-to-face, as close to face-to-face as possible, because that's how we're going to sharpen each other, that's how we're going to help each other, that's how we're going to expose the negative things, the isolation, reverse the isolation and the effects of it.
Yeah, and just to plug into that, every Wednesday, if you're on Central Time at 6:30, Josh is leading a youth community that wants to support you. It wants to get behind you. We'll be streaming live every Wednesday, so go and check it out. And directly after, they're having people do Zoom calls like this with other young people like you to interact and have this face-to-face he's talking about to get you connected. So if you want to be a part of that, DM us, let us know your information, and we will make sure you get connected. That's one virtual community that's ready to go, ready to connect you in. Anywhere you're at, just make sure you're on Central Time at 6:30.
Finding a form of normalcy in a schedule, or in a having a goal to set. So setting a goal and being like that. So I know that during this time I was like, man, I want to dance more. I want to sharpen some dance skills. I want to draw more, because I used to draw a while back. I'm setting up time outside of
physical health is awesome.
Yes. So just outside of just scrolling on my screen, I have set aside time to
I love that. I mean, I know we could keep going for like another 2 hours, because you start talking about safety plans, you start talking about how to combat triggers. You know, like when something triggers you, what normally would lead to like spiraling into anxiety and getting into your head, you can relieve and you can combat by doing things that you enjoy, tapping into the simple things in life, sometimes like painting and dancing and the creative things that actually they can like be the make or break for all of us, you know, like to really combat those moments where we feel alone or where we feel low. My hope is that in this coronavirus time, we're going to see so many people discover new passions and sharpen new passions and say, when I was tempted to think those things, I actually started drawing instead. I actually started running instead.
Yes, and I think we need to come back at another time and actually explore triggers. I think we have so much content that's good for probably our first Dear George talk on isolation. So thank you guys so much for coming out and just giving some input. We want to keep doing these just to encourage our young people. So remember, speak up, tell someone, reach out, text home to 741-741 and get connected. Come, if you don't know where to get connect into Company Youth, at Company Youth, Instagram, 6:30 Central Time. We love you guys, and we'll see you at the next Table Talk.